The world around them was cloaked in an eternal dusk, a realm where time seemed to stop. The cold winter air seeped deep into the bones of anyone brave enough to set foot on that grim landscape. A man, his sword wet with the blood of an unknown creature, stood still at the edge of a forest that seemed to have forgotten the touch of sunlight. His breath came out in a cloud, floating lazily in front of him, like the remnants of hope long forgotten. The man could not be called old, at least not by usual standards. Yet the deep wrinkles on his face, the lines etched by years of suffering, told a different story, one of battles fought, storms weathered. He was a relic of this land, every wound a testament to his survival in a world where only the strong endure. As he wiped the blood from his sword, his senses were triggered. His ears caught a sound so soft it could easily have been dismissed by a less experienced man, but not him. He listened, and then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he veered off the well-worn path toward the source of the sound. In the distance, hidden among trees that twisted as if curled under the weight of their own sorrow, an unmistakable call of a bird filled the cold forest silence. The bird chirped, undisturbed by the frozen quiet, as though challenging the man to approach, to understand the message it carried. The man's lips curved into a cynical smile, but his eyes remained sharp. "Are you foolish or just pretending to be?" he muttered softly. But despite the mocking tone in his voice, there was an undeniable edge to his words. The bird, indifferent or perhaps defiant, continued to sing, unwavering. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if the ground beneath him was too sacred to rush. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath, the silence betraying an eerie calm. As he neared the source of the sound, he spoke, his voice cutting through the thick stillness. "I don't know who you are, but come out, I'm here now." Then, as if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in dark robes. The man paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied the stranger. The cold, steady voice confirmed his suspicion. "Are you Sir Stanga?" Without hesitation, Vlad handed over the letter from his superior. The parchment was old, its edges torn as though it had traveled many roads, each marking the journey he now walked. Stanga took the letter without comment, his scarred face twisting into something unreadable as he slowly scanned its contents. Vlad, unable to read his expression, felt a knot of anxiety twist in his stomach. Was Stanga entertained, angry? It was hard to tell. "All right," Stanga finally said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "My superior ordered me to follow this kid." "Follow me," Stanga suddenly said, spinning on his heel. His back was a rigid silhouette against the gray sky as he began walking into the heart of the forest. Vlad hesitated for a moment before following. As they walked, the silence between them grew thick with unspoken words, each step echoing in the frozen air. Stanga, sensing Vlad's unease, seemed to relish in the discomfort he had created. He was a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin, and his words were like daggers, each one aimed to disrupt the balance of the young man at his side. You seem pretty foolish. I wonder if you can lead me properly," Stanga said in a mocking tone. Vlad's jaw tightened, but he stared at Stanga without flinching. "I'm good enough to give you directions." Stanga's eyes glinted with amusement, as though enjoying Vlad's challenge. "I don't think so." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around Vlad's thoughts. How can someone who makes the call of a summer migratory bird in the middle of winter be considered smart? Vlad's face flushed with anger, his grip tightening on the letter in his hand. The insult stung deeper than he wanted to admit, but he held back from showing it. Vlad's voice faltered, his eyes briefly revealing his emotions. Stanga noticed the change, his smile widening in satisfaction. He relished in the discomfort, watching as Vlad struggled to maintain his composure. It was a game for him, a test of strength, a test of will. If you even hint that this isn't the right path during our journey, I'll kill you, bastard. The words were a threat, but there was something in Stanga's voice that made Vlad feel the weight of it, as though it was more than just an empty warning. It was a reminder of the world. They inhabited a world where affection was rare, and survival was the only rule that mattered. Stanga grinned cynically as he looked at Vlad, who hadn't backed down even after the lesson he had just received. You better not lose your way. I'll finish you off with one blow if you do, Stanga warned, his voice full of threat. We'll camp here tonight, Vlad said firmly. Don't you have any food? Stanga asked, looking around as if searching for something to eat. I have some, Vlad replied without hesitation. And me? Stanga asked, a bit annoyed. He didn't prepare any for me, Vlad answered, showing his displeasure with the situation. Stanga sighed deeply, then reluctantly took out the dried meat he had brought. It seemed very little, far from what one would expect from a knight clad in steel plate. Vlad hung the dried meat over the fire while starting the campfire that began to flicker with reddish-yellow light. The dried meat did look unusual. It resembled a clump of meat haphazardly assembled rather than properly cut jerky. However, the smell it could whet the appetite. Even its aroma, as it roasted over the fire, made Stanga's stomach growl. Got a question for me? Stanga asked, approaching Vlad, who was roasting the meat. Why the sudden question like that? Vlad replied, confused. I'll answer one question for every piece of dried meat. An opportunity like this doesn't come every day, Stanga answered with a slight smile. Stanga was slightly surprised by the offer, but he didn't refuse. If you want, just ask. I have the dignity of a knight, boy. A knight only accepts gifts that are fair, Stanga replied, slightly challenging. But you're retired, Vlad reminded him. Even so, everything I've done, double quotes, Stanga paused, then answered, name, Stanga said, starting the conversation. Age, Vlad asked, curious. 42. Hey boy, Stanga chuckled. Do you know how to use aura? Vlad asked, staring at him seriously. Haha, now I understand. You're just pretending to be innocent. Stanga laughed lightly. Vlad wasn't bothered by Stanga's laughter, remaining serious. Can you use it or not? Stanga realized the seriousness in Vlad's tone and snorted softly before responding with difficulty. Not all knights can use aura, and and Vlad pressed. Even if they can use it, that doesn't mean it can be used in real battle, Stanga grinned. So, can you or not? Vlad asked with conviction. Take it all, Stanga said with no expression. What? Vlad was surprised. The dried meat, Stanga replied, offering the jerky. Vlad quickly handed over the bag of dried meat, afraid that Stanga might say something else. Sometimes you need to lift your spirits, Stanga said, while looking at Vlad's eyes that were beginning to shine. Vlad's heart raced. He could truly feel it, the essence of a knight, an aura unseen by most people. Stanga felt slightly burdened by Vlad's intense gaze, and swallowed before speaking. All right. Watch closely. Vlad accepted the meat being roasted by Stanga with eyes shining, waiting for what would happen next. Zzz. Stanga drew his sword with both hands. The well-maintained sword slid out smoothly and silently, like an honorable woman extending her hand shyly. Why are you closing your left eye? Vlad asked, confused. I have to bring my own world from within my soul, Stanga answered softly. Vlad didn't understand the words, only watching Stanga, who now stood straight. A knight stood under the moonlight with a campfire in front of him. However, his presence could not be hidden despite the two sources of light. Knight Stanga. He was someone who knew how to carry his own light. Look at this, kid, Stanga whispered to his sword, gently kissing it. It was a conversation with his sword, as though casting a spell to bring his world into the real one. Wow, double quotes, Vlad gasped, watching the blue light beginning to glow from Stanga's sword. Within the darkness enveloping the corridors of Shore City, a sense of unease crept into Vlad's soul. His steps were steady, but inside there was an unrest that words could not express. Stanga, following behind him, could only sense the heavy burden pressing on their chests. They were heading into a dark, dangerous, and unpredictable place called Rose's Smiles. Filthy, that was the thought that crossed Stanga's mind as he spoke with a hoarse voice. I feel so dirty. So filthy, Vlad, not even glancing behind, simply nodded without saying much. We're almost there. They continued walking in silence, their footsteps breaking the stillness, but something was odd. This corridor, one that Vlad should have been very familiar with, looked different. The walls were damaged, blood-stains scattered everywhere. Is this place usually like this? Stanga asked, his voice filled with concern. No, Vlad answered briefly, and though he said it firmly, there was something shaking his calm. This corridor was no longer the same. Heavy signs of battle, fresh blood, and a sense of violence that had just occurred. They quickened their pace, drawing closer to their destination. Ahead, the entrance to Rose's Smiles appeared, but what they saw was no longer a place filled with laughter and entertainment. The room was destroyed, full of blood and lifeless bodies. In the middle of the chaos, Vlad felt panic beginning to creep into him. Marcella will faint, he thought, imagining the face of the woman who always had a smile, now covered in blood. But there was something more important. I need to find someone. Don't worry, the woman you love is safe, Burley said with a sly grin. I know everything. Vlad ignored Burley's words and immediately headed for the 4th floor, his steps quick and determined. Once there, the air felt thicker, filled with a sharp stench of blood. There, amidst the rows of lifeless bodies, stood Jorge, the leader who had never faltered in the face of danger. Jorge, I've arrived, Vlad said, though the words sounded more like a statement that had to be made. Jorge, who seemed unfazed by the horrific surroundings, simply nodded. Good, well done. Are you all right? Vlad asked, his voice full of concern. It's been a long time since I fought an opponent of equal strength, but at least I did my part, Jorge replied, though his words sounded like an admission from a warrior who had never been afraid. But as his gaze shifted to the body impaled by a sword behind him, his expression changed. George's eyes were filled with fury. Those who fight only for money have a different way of fighting, he muttered, staring sharply at the body lying there. Jorge nodded, a smile forming on his face. Good, tomorrow we'll finish everything. We need to settle this once and for all. George's eyes now burned with passion. The ferocity that had long been suppressed was ready to burst. Jorge nodded, a smile forming on his face. Good, tomorrow we'll finish everything. We need to settle this once and for all. George's eyes now burned with passion. The ferocity that had long been suppressed was ready to burst. Vlad stood with a sharp gaze. He spoke in a calm yet confident tone, uttering a name that had long remained a shadow. Stanga, the knight he could rely on, whom he claimed could use aura. With a low voice filled with hope, he expressed his belief that tomorrow they would win. Jorge, who was sitting not far from him, turned sharply. His pupils narrowed, as if he had just been pierced by an unexpected truth. What? He muttered in shock, his voice no more than a choked whisper. Tension immediately crept into the air like a fog that suddenly thickened. But before Jorge could ask further, Vlad turned toward the old stone stairs leading to the entrance. The sound of light yet firm footsteps echoed, ascending one by one, with a rhythm that was almost eerie. Vlad squinted and murmured softly, as if welcoming fate. Looks like he has arrived now. Jorge turned pale. His voice caught in his throat, but still forced its way out. Vlad. Can he really use aura? Without hesitation, Vlad nodded. Yes, I saw it myself. But something changed in George's eyes. A flash of suspicion mixed with fear surged behind his gaze. He stepped back, then quickly reached to his waist. The sound of metal clashing broke the silence as his sword slid out of its sheath. With reflexive movement, he pulled Vlad behind him and shouted in full alert, "Hide behind me." Jorge stood tall, his body tense, and now his eyes burned with uncontrollable anger. He cried out, his voice echoing through the stone hallway, "Stanga doesn't know how to use aura." In an instant, the world felt frozen. Vlad's heart pounded. His body felt frozen not from the cold, but from the shock that shook him to the bone. He whispered, barely audible, "What do you mean?" The old wooden door creaked softly, opening like a gateway to another world. Thin smoke crept through the gap, and from the shadows emerged a figure that made the air feel suffocating. His eyes glowed like dying embers, his face not unfamiliar, yet now looked foreign with a smile that held pain, hatred, and decayed memories of the past. With calm yet threatening steps, the figure walked in. In his hand, a sword still dripped with fresh blood. His voice was deep and cold, piercing straight into their hearts. "You've come a long way, long time no see, Jorge." The faint smile on his lips brought no peace, only gaping wounds, and the night bore witness to the beginning of a truth they never wanted to face.